Russian airstrike targets civilians in Yarova, Donetsk, killing over 20 during pension distribution. Yarova, Donetsk region, Ukraine, September 9, 2025. A Russian airstrike on the village of Yarova in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region has left at least 25 civilians dead and 19 others wounded, marking one of the deadliest attacks on civilians in recent weeks. The strike, which occurred around 11 a.m. local time, targeted a group of mostly elderly residents gathered to collect their monthly pension payments from a mobile post office operated by Ukraine's National Postal Service, Ukrposhta. Ukrainian officials have condemned the attack as a deliberate act of terrorism, calling for a robust international response. Details of the attack. The airstrike involved a Russian glide bomb, a retrofitted Soviet-era weapon equipped with wings and satellite navigation, which struck the heart of Yarova, a small village located less than 10 kilometers or 6 miles from the front line. The bomb hit near a church, cemetery, and school where civilians were lined up to receive their pension payments. The attack obliterated an Ukrposhta postal vehicle parked under trees as a security measure to avoid detection. According to Igor Smilyansky, CEO of Ukrposhta, the vehicle's placement was part of ongoing efforts to adapt pension distribution protocols in frontline areas to minimize risks. President Volodymyr Zelensky described the attack as brutally savage, stating, "Russians hit the village of Yarova in Donetsk region with an air bomb at the place where people were receiving pensions. According to preliminary information, more than 20 people were killed." He shared graphic footage of the aftermath on Telegram, showing bodies strewn across the ground near the damaged postal vehicle, personal belongings scattered, and a children's playground nearby. Ukrainian Interior Minister Igor Klimenko confirmed the use of a guided aerial bomb, noting that most victims were elderly pensioners. The head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, Vadim Filashkin, reported that 23 of the deceased were pensioners. He called the attack pure terrorism, emphasizing that it was not a military operation, but a deliberate targeting of civilians. Rescuers, medics, police, and local authorities are working at the scene. He said, "We are helping the victims and determining the exact consequences of this crime, urging residents to evacuate to safer regions." Casualties and aftermath. The attack claimed at least 25 lives, with the death toll rising as emergency services continued their work. Among the victims were local pensioners and an Ukrposhta employee, Yulia, the head of the local branch, who was injured but survived thanks to quick intervention by a driver. She is currently receiving treatment in a hospital in Sloviansk or Kramatorsk. At least 19 others were wounded, with 3 in critical condition. Personal accounts from survivors highlight the tragedy's human toll. Yarova resident Hennady Trush lost his wife, who was collecting her bedridden mother-in-law's pension. "It was beyond words," Trush told the AP, his face still covered in soot as he described the scene. Before, strikes landed on the outskirts. This time it was right in the center of the village. Trush fled Yarova with his elderly mother, who was evacuated on a stretcher. Zinaida Hrimalo visited a local morgue to identify her 75-year-old cousin killed in the strike. She said, "They were all lying in one heap. My sister has been completely burned." She noted that her cousin's paralyzed husband was left alone in the village as the couple had planned to evacuate after collecting the pension. Context of the attack. Yarova, with a pre-war population of about 2,800, lies on a key railway line between Liman and Izum, approximately 20 kilometers north of Sloviansk. The village was occupied by Russian forces in June 2022, but liberated by Ukraine later that year. Its proximity to the front line, less than 10 kilometers or 6 miles from Russian positions, makes it vulnerable to attacks. Yet many residents remain due to financial constraints or the need to care for elderly or disabled relatives. The attack comes amid Russia's intensified offensive in Donetsk, where Moscow has concentrated significant firepower and deployed up to 100,000 troops, according to Ukrainian officials. Russian forces have been advancing slowly, targeting civilian infrastructure and frontline communities. The use of glide bombs, some weighing up to 3,000 pounds, has caused widespread destruction in eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian authorities and international observers, including the United Nations, report that over 12,000 civilians have been killed since Russia's full-scale invasion began in February 2022. International reactions and calls for action. President Zelensky and Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiga have called for a strong international response, urging the United States, Europe, and the G20 to impose tougher sanctions and take decisive action against Russia. The Russians continue destroying lives while avoiding new strong sanctions and new strong blows, Zelensky said. The world must not remain silent. Sybiga labeled the attack a heinous crime, accusing Russia of hypocrisy in claiming to save people in Donetsk while targeting civilians. European Council President Antonio Costa condemned the Kremlin, asking, "Is this what Russia means when it talks about peace?" He called upon Russian President Vladimir Putin to accept peace talks, which Ukraine has endorsed. Mateusz Schmali, the UN humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, denounced the attack as unconscionable, emphasizing that wars have rules and civilians must not be targeted. Despite U.S. President Donald Trump's recent efforts to broker a ceasefire, including a summit with Putin in Alaska on August 15, 2025, diplomatic progress has stalled. Russia's largest aerial assault on Kyiv, which targeted the main government building on September 8th, and the Yarova strike indicate an escalation in attacks. U.S. and European officials met on September 8th to discuss economic pressure on Russia, including new sanctions and tariffs on Russian oil, but no concrete measures have been announced. Russian response and denials. Russia's Ministry of Defense has not officially commented on the Yarova attack. However, Russian state media, TASS, cited a Telegram channel claiming Russia did not carry out the strike, though no evidence was provided. Russia has consistently denied targeting civilians, despite evidence of repeated strikes on civilian areas, with 98% of civilian casualties in Ukraine-controlled territory attributed to Russian aggression, according to UN monitors. Ongoing investigations and humanitarian impact. Ukraine's Prosecutor General's office has launched a war crime investigation under Article 438 of the Criminal Code. Police, rescuers, and forensic teams are working to identify victims and document the attack's consequences. The Donetsk region has seen a surge in civilian casualties in recent days, with 6 killed and 10 injured in a separate attack on September 8th. The strike has disrupted pension distribution in frontline areas, prompting Ukr-Posta to reconsider its protocols. Oleksandr Zhuravlov, head of the Liman City Military Administration, told Suspian that future payments would be moved to safer locations as the front line is less than 10 kilometers away. 22 residents have already been evacuated from Yarova, and authorities continue to urge others to leave. Conclusion. The Yarova airstrike underscores the ongoing brutality of Russia's war in Ukraine, particularly its targeting of vulnerable civilian populations. As the international community grapples with how to respond, Ukrainian officials and residents mourn the loss of life and call for justice. The attack, described as a deliberate act of terror, has reignited demands for stronger sanctions and accountability for Russian war crimes, as the conflict, now in its 42nd month, shows no signs of abating.